Okay, hello and welcome to everyone for the April 2022 meeting of the St. Louis Java Users Group. I am not Bruce Osbaugh. He's on a trip and could not be in town this month. So my name is Ted Doyle, and I will be doing the introducing our speaker and going through the slides. So let's see here. Let me get the slides up. Let's see. Okay, okay. All right. Okay, can everybody,
Yeah, we can see it.
all right, welcome to the St. Louis Java Users Group, the April 22nd, and April 14th meeting in 2022. When we meet in person, the attendant, let's see. All right. Having a little technical difficulties. It has the idea of the pace. When we meet in person, we meet, this is an informal group. The attendance is free. We don't have we have no formal membership list. Our normal meeting date is the second Tuesday of each month, except December when there's no meeting because it's just December is just too busy a time of the year. Join us when we meet in person. Please join us for food and social. At 6 p.m. Our meeting starts at 6:30 p.m. Our normal meeting location is Object Computing Incorporated in the training room, OCI, and that's located at 12,140 Woodcrest Executive Drive, Suite 310, St. Louis, Missouri. And the steering committee, going from the left to the right, there's myself, Ted Doyle, there's Todd Zimmerman, there's Bruce Osbaugh, and I'm getting to the fact that this is a tough shoes to fill. He's off this week. And there's continuing, there's Wei Ching Gao, and on the far right is Kathy Zong. And if you want to reach the whole steering group, you can email us at javasig, SE, short for steering committee, at ociweb.com. I'd like to recognize our major sponsors. OCI Incorporated, our founding sponsors, goes all the way back to 1997. Provides meeting room, provides some web hosting, provides a lot of other stuff. JFrog, who provides the Zoom subscription fees plus the occasional raffle. Signature Consulting and Adaptive Solutions are both recruiters looking for Java programmers. They sponsor food for our meetings when they're in person. JetBrains is a maker of excellent IDEs for Java and other languages. At the end of the meeting, we'll raffle off 2 100% discount coupons for a single ID of the winner's choice. Must be present to win. If you're, yeah. Elastic Solutions, a company providing both solutions for organization search, monitoring cloud-hosted web applications, and security. They give away gift cards when we meet in person, and we hope to be raffling them off when we start to meet up in person again. Intertech is a training company, good online training. They sponsor the Screaming Flying Monkey coffee cup and mouse pads that go as a package when you get them together. Manning is a publisher of excellent books. I've never seen a bad one in them, and I've gone through quite a few. We will be raffling off 2 ebooks at the end of the meeting. You also must be present to win. Pearson's another book publishing company. When we meet in real life and physically, we raffle off books when we meet in person. And another thank you to all our sponsors. Okay, on May 12th, we got forward with Java 18 and beyond with Billy Coronado of Oracle. I think that got moved back from a day because he's also in Atlanta at Dem Nexus with Bruce. So I'll be looking forward to that. You keep track of upcoming presentations by looking at our meetup.com/gatewayjug for updates and presentation schedules. If you're interested in giving a presentation or sponsoring a jug, again, email the steering committee at javasigsc@ociweb.com. And tonight's presentation is Fail or Retry by Asha Somayajula of Mastercard. I apologize for the pronunciation. I'm trying.
No worries.
Okay. And I think that's it. And okay. And okay, Asha, it's all yours when you're ready. You should be able to share.
Great. Thank you. Let me just share my screen. I don't have much of a presentation here. I thought it might be easier to just walk through. If I can bring it up, I guess. Yeah. I don't have, maybe slides will help. Yeah. Slideshow. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Asha Somayajula. I'm a lead developer in Mastercard. I've been there for the past 4 years and working on mainly the Java tech stack, Spring Boot, Spring, and back in Postgres with an event-driven architecture. The Spring Retry is basically a spin-off from the Spring Batch library that most of you might be familiar with. They're basically a couple of lean libraries that allow you to kind of that give you the retry function or the repeat template that they or the repeat function that that you can use within any of your batch applications or within your own applications, whether it's a microservices or other. But it doesn't have the overload or the bloated requirement to have batch installed with the UI, with the database supporting it and the SQL supporting it. So this allows you to kind of have access to the retry capability, just like some of the other libraries that are out there outside of Spring Retry, that are competitive, and resiliency for J, I believe, is something which is quite competitive to the same library that's available. But one of the reasons why the team and I were looking at it was basically we wanted to improve the resiliency of one of the Axon consumers that was basically a subscriber to messages coming in across the control plane with about almost 1 million messages per day. And the idea was to find a mechanism to retry on failure. So whether it was a checked exception or whether it was a runtime exception, we wanted to find a way to migrate off some legacy code that had that basically was a listener that would listen to certain events and basically catch the exceptions and then make a retry attempt. So this was so this library here gave us the same resiliency with the same functionality that we had with the legacy listener class. And it also provided the benefit of a plug and play kind of approach where you could just plug in the retry framework with one Maven dependency, and then define your policies, define your callbacks, and you basically had an infrastructure in place already without having to write custom code. So in terms of documentation, I really didn't want to cut and paste some of the documentation that's currently there because it just makes sense to kind of walk through the documentation here. So where it's bare form, it has a retry template, much like the REST template, which has certain operations that can be executed And it also, as you can see within the signature, you can see the retry callback, you can have a recovery callback, and also you can have a retry state. This allows you to keep track of multiple retries and manage state between each retry attempt. The basic callback looks somewhat like this. There's a method, it's an interface, do with retry. You can give it a retry context. So basically, when you define your strategy as to how you want to retry based off certain policies as defined within the API, within the library definition. And for example, here you have a timeout retry where you set a timeout where you're waiting for a thread to respond within 300 seconds or 30 seconds. And what it does is that once that timeout expires, you can define a retry callback, and you can kind of recover either from that process, or you can continue to retry until the thread is available again. Sorry. Yeah. Right, could you go on? Yeah, if you're not talking, if you could go on mute, thank you. At its core, there is a retry context. It is a nested, for nested retries, it keeps track of state within the same thread. And it's useful when you want to pass in certain attributes that you want to keep track of within multiple retries. So there are stateless retries. There's also stateful retries. Again, state while maintained between threads is stateful. There's also the stateless where you just execute a retry policy and you're basically done. There is a context cache, which is basically a cache, a map in memory, where you can define your attributes, and then you can also define your retry operations. You can recover from the retry operations that have failed or have succeeded. Retry policies, they're basically inside the retry template, you would find a bunch of, there is the execute method, and you can define the retry policy that you want to apply. So there is a simple retry policy, which basically takes max number of attempts. You can set the retry exceptions on which a retry attempt is made. A fatal exception, you can also define you can also use the policy by executing it eventually on the retry template. And then there's also the exception classifier retry policy, which classifies exceptions that you want to have different policies of recovery. So for example, if you have a connect exception, you might want to recover, you want to do an infinite retry versus, just a checked exception. You just want to, basically terminate after one retry there. Back off policies are, it's basically when you're waiting for a failure. You want to wait before you actually execute the policy. You can give it a back off context, and then you can it's basically an object.wait as indicated in the documentation, where you can back off for a few seconds or milliseconds and then execute the policy that you have in place. It also has some listeners, which basically are listening to all the events that happen during a retry attempt. So you would have like when the retry open happens, or when an error happens, or when the context is closed. These are callbacks, and you can define your own mechanisms to recover from any of these failure attempts. A declarative retry is basically where you're saying that you're using Java configuration and you're using point cuts, interceptors, and you can use some of the AOP functions to kind of define a declarative definition of a retry policy. But if you look at the API, if we can go up, that I had. Yeah. This is probably the best thing. I was looking for the Java doc. Yeah, so under retry policies, you will see a bunch of them. One is an always retry, where you always retry no matter what. A binary exception classifier retry policy is when you specifically use a binary classification. I haven't used this personally, so I'm not sure how it works, but there's good enough documentation on how you want to capture that. There's circuit breaker retry policy. Again, I haven't used this very much, but I believe it fails on it has the circuit open and circuit close, I guess, when the and it executes the retry policy when those events happen. Composite retry is when you want to apply multiple policies. So you might have a simple retry for one, and then you might have an infinite retry for another kind of exception. So you want to combine those and make sure that that fits in one single composite retry. Exception classifier is again based off the exception classification, where you categorize exceptions and basically say that if you see a checked exception or an illegal argument exception, do this, versus if you see a connect exception, do this. So you can actually group, and then you can also, based on the expression in the throwable stack trace, you can also look for the particular string in the exception that is thrown. The max attempts retry is again, you can it gives you a number of attempts that you can retry on, and you can retry a fixed number of times. Never retry is when you don't want to retry at all, and it's basically it is a policy that you probably want to incorporate for some certain use cases. Simple retry again is you can define the maximum number of attempts. You can define the exception you want to retry on, and then it has a default max attempts constant as well. Timeout retry again, as discussed, it's based off a timeout, and based on the time that you specify, it retries after that expiration of the time happens. And then you also have the cache capacity exceeded when the cache limit has exceeded. Sorry. And then in terms of the annotations that are also available, which are pretty useful if you don't want to write declarative code. One is, let's see if I can have this. One is where you define the back off the time that you want to take before you start retrying. A circuit breaker, which allows you to again define the events and then define on how you want to react to that policy with the policy. You can enable a retry, which is also a retry, which you specify the max attempts, you define the attributes to this annotation. Actually, this is the one that actually kicks in with the retryable on a method when defined. It kicks off the retryable process policy that is applied. recover, again, how you want to recover from the exception that's thrown. And this again is another annotation that just indicates, whether it is retravel or not. And then you can define your listeners, you can define your max attempts, back off, etc. So I do have a project, a demo project that I did create. It is essentially within the POM. There's really not much happening here other than the boot starter, and then including the batch, starter dependency. That includes all the libraries that you need. And then essentially the app config is where, I don't know if you can see my screen, but so this is where I've defined a retry template as a bean configuration. I give it a fixed back off policy of 500 milliseconds. I set the back off policy. I define the exceptions that I want to retry on. So illegal arguments, any of the exceptions. This probably, I was testing this, this is probably not needed. But anyway, so here it's applying a simple retry policy where for all these exceptions, it repeats 5 times. And then for an infinite retravel exception, you give it a connect exception, and then you're basically saying for this connect exception, you do infinite retries, but for any other exception that is thrown, do not. So you can have those, you have that capability as well, where you can turn off retry attempts on certain exceptions. And then you just run this for as many times as you want. And then you define a composite retry policy where you're basically saying that you define multiple policies that you want to apply, and then you set the policies on the composite retry, and then set the retry policy on the actual retry template. So it's pretty simple. There was nothing to it. Here, for example, I have a connect exception that I'm throwing. And the only thing, according to this, it should, for a connect exception, it should retry about 5 times. So actually it might do, it would probably do an infinite one. Let me see if I can bring up the application. Browser. And then as you can see, it just retries as many times as you want for an infinite retry. And then if you switch the exception that you are throwing, let's say an illegal access exception, it should do it 5 times, I believe. Yeah, I'm not sure why it's pulling up with an exception here, but yeah, there you go. This is the exception being thrown. So it retries 5 times, and then eventually it throws the exception, I guess. So yeah, I mean, that's it was a short presentation, but this is all I wanted to describe today. I don't know if anybody has any questions.
I'm curious when, say you have a upstream issue and you have new requests coming in that you're trying to serve from that connection and making those requests. And then you have this retry stuff going on. Do you have to protect against, you know, a huge increase in traffic trying to service those requests, both with the initial incoming new requests and all these retries? Like, is that something you have to be careful about?
Not really. I mean, I guess you would have to, and I think a reasonable retry limit is what I would suggest. You know, for example, on a connect failure, you probably want to retry a couple of times at least before you can terminate. You know, usually, you know, database connections or, you know, things which are temporary network glitches, you usually can recover from. So those retries, I think, would be longer run, or at least, you know, at a reasonable retry limit. But for the rest of the you know, checked exceptions or any of the database exceptions that you see, you might want to retry a couple of times and terminate. So it doesn't have to be an intensive, you know, set of requests that are being retried here. I think it can be a very simple configuration which can, you know, give you what you're looking for. Just a couple of retries and then your ability to recover from it, and that's it, you terminate. You know, so I think it depends on how many requests. Even if you have a lot of requests coming in, it depends on your, so for example, in the Axon consumer that we had, the number of requests coming in that bus is probably, it's up to 1 million per day, I think. So I hear in production. But when any of them fails, when any of those retry attempts happen, those retry attempts are a couple of retries, and unless it's a timeout or a network glitch kind of error, those terminate within 5 or 10 attempts, depending on what we've configured it for. But I don't think those requests are any more intensive than what you're receiving in production in terms of the HTTP requests that your service is processing. So it completely depends upon how you configure it. I don't know if I answered the question, but
Yeah, thank you.
Asha, can the retry logic be enhanced such that when it retries, it might, you know, look for like a format exception, and if the format is incorrect, maybe throw it to a dead letter queue or something to that effect?
yeah, you can definitely do that. I mean, the callback is there. The callback is available for you to do. You know, you have a listener that's sitting up there with a retry context. So if you do have an error, you can recover from that. You can even define the recovery callback. So, you know, if you want to throw the message that you were trying to commit, and the attempt fails on a recovery, you can push it to a dead letter, you know, topic, for instance, and terminate the thread. So you can definitely plug it in. It's not difficult at all. But it gives you the mechanism to handle conditions, error conditions, which I think is the biggest benefit here. And you can gracefully recover and exit from an erroneous condition, rather than, you know, just throw the exception and you're done, you know. So that's the benefit of the framework. And because it is bundled with Batch, and it's also published outside of it now, it's available as a lean library that you can plug in with any project and any microservice that you have. And, you know, it gives you out of the box functionality, which is very easy to implement, like you saw. And then there was also the repeat library also that is available. So Spring, like you have the Spring retry, you have a Spring repeat that allows you to incorporate repeatable events or repeatable tasks. You know, so nice lean libraries that you can plug in very easily.
We had a question from the audience. I think you may have covered it. What about random wait time before retrying?
Yeah, there is the back off policy that you can specify as many milliseconds or seconds as you like. That basically gives you the wait time that you're looking for. So on the back off, for example, you have a fixed back off policy, you define the back off period, and it basically sleeps for those many seconds or milliseconds, and on recovery, it kickstarts the retry attempt again.
Okay, thank you.
I have a quick question.
Go for it.
If I got here late, so you may have already covered it. Was there a like a escalation where does the framework provide some kind of escalation of the exception, so that if it does, so it may try to connect, 5 times, and if it doesn't, then there's another being that takes over to send out emails or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the callback, once you cover, let's say 5 attempts, you can define a recovery callback on the last one, where you can kind of send out the email, or you can do it within, the 3rd attempt. There is a retry count that you can keep track of, and you can probably put that in the retry context as an attribute. And then once it reaches, let's say 5, all you have to do is just check for that count in the retry callback and send out the email that you want.
Okay, I see Jake has got his hand up.
Thanks. Could you elaborate a little bit on the success case? Is there a way to return a value, or is it just that it exits gracefully? Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
So it does exit gracefully. You can return.
I think I noticed that in the first page you showed there was like a return and some value. I wasn't sure if that's just like a Boolean, or if you can return an actual object.
It depends. Well, I think that goes away from the concept of what you want to use this for, because the idea is that you're executing a code block on a retry attempt. So
yeah,
there won't be any state there unless you have a stateful retriable context that you keep track of within all the retries, within that same, within the thread executions. But it's a stateless execution essentially, because all you're doing is if a given exception happens, do this and exit.
Okay.
That's the idea. I mean,
So it's up to you. So it's up to you to define a callback or whatever
Exactly.
you want it to do.
And even if you want to return an object, sure, put it on the retry context and return it back.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
I don't see anybody else wanting to ask any questions. So let's again have a nice and give another thank you to Asha for a very nice presentation. And with that, I will conclude the record portion of the meeting. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.